Welcome to an exploration of sight and mind, a travel through the world of films and the artists that bring you these masterpieces. Do you love films, directors, actors, cinematographers, editors, composers, or any of the hundreds of artists that bring you these feats of art? I am Luis Lacau, your host into the world of films, your guide to Man Bites Retro. A long time ago, in the underground realm where there are no lies or pain, there lived a princess who dreamed of the human world. She dreamed of blue skies, soft breeze, and sunshine. One day, eluding her keepers, the princess escaped. Once outside, the brightness blinded her and erased every trace of the past from her memory. She forgot who she was and where she came from. Her body suffered cold, sickness, and pain. Eventually, she died. However, her father, the king, always knew. This is one of the opening lines, the narrative, the main narration given by Pan himself in one of the most amazing films of Guillermo Del Toro. Is Pan's Labyrinth is the American name, but in reality, let's go with the real name, El Laberinto del Fauno, which is a 2006 film, and I have an amazing guest with me today, Mollee B Marcus.
Thank you. Hi, nice to be here, especially to talk about Pan's Labyrinth, and I wish I could pronounce it as beautifully as you just did.
Oh, but come on. It's no matter what way I love the Spanish accent. I don't know what it is about actual Spanish accent from Spain itself. It's so beautifully done, especially in this film. It's so crisp and so like it adds a layer to the world. For those of you that don't know what this film is about, it's, first of all, God, where have you been? But second of all, this takes place during World War II in the Franco era in Spain, where basically Franco is this dictator it was a puppet state for Hitler, and it's the main antagonist of this film is one of the commanders in the Franco army, and the Franco army was ruthless. They were basically imperialistic, just like Hitler's Nazi party was, and they hated the communists, which was what the opposing force was. And this takes place right during the events of D-Day, and right around the same time. You can hear it on the radio and everything. But that's just the backdrop. That's not the real story. The real story is this little girl that, like I said in the narration that I just read off, is a princess. She's the princess of this underworld.
Yes. Or
is she? And that's the fascinating part of this movie. What is the true adventure? What's more bleak and dark? The underworld where she comes from, or the world that she's living in now? And I think that's one of my favorite allures of this movie, is that this shows you the grass isn't always greener on the other side.
Correct.
Fantasy could be as dark.
Yes. Well, and I think that this movie centers around sacrifice.
Yep.
Both in the figurative sense, right, with the fawn,
but
it also her sacrifice that she's experiencing because her mother is weak. Her mother marries this horrible man. You know, her new stepfather is this ruthless captain. In the Spanish army. And restrictive and you know, she can't behave as a normal child. So what are the sacrifices that she's doing, you know, as she escapes into her different adventures, into the woods, into wherever she can, just to escape the constraints of her childhood, which I think that, you know, I don't know exactly what inspires Del Toro with these sad stories. But they're always so deep and so layered that, you know, it's more than just this fairy tale, right? I mean, Ophelia fascinated, you know, she's fascinated with fairy tales anyway.
I think it's the dark fascination of the fantasy world that
Yeah.
maybe our life could be better if we allow ourselves to fall into this fantasy and allow ourselves to be consumed by this alternate world. But I love how Guillermo kind of turns that on its side and says, no, we shouldn't be living in this fantasy world. We have to face reality. We have to face the real world. Because how about if fantasy is not better?
Right. Yeah, and the after effects of this movie are so many. Not only just in like our own dream state, but I could never look at a dragonfly ever again this time.
Right?
I just could not because I'm thinking it could be a fairy, right? It could
Right?
lead me somewhere else, and so of course my imagination goes crazy. But I think what's important is you have this old fawn who could be however you want that symbol to be, right? You could take it occultish, you could take it however, right? You could just take it as Pan, you could take it as the trickster god, you could take it as, well, is it something more dark? We don't know. And she has to prove herself by surviving 3 really gruesome tasks. And basically she's told if she's not able to prove that she really is this princess, she'll never see the king.
Yep.
And so we don't even know if she'll see the king. We don't even know if there is a king.
Yeah, and then the dark events that occur in the real world aspect of the movie are very is she going to survive the real world?
Right.
That's where you're like, oh my God, is she going to survive in the fantasy world? And then in comparison, is she going to survive the real world? What's going on? Because there's some crazy stuff going on in the commander's house and everything that's unfolding in the mill itself where they're living at currently. And I love that comparison because I think it's very important to show that to kids, that you can't just live in these fantasy worlds. These aren't just fun fairy tales for you to put your mind at ease and enjoy. These are all like moral tales. That's what fairy tales were originally. And I think that's fascinating how Guillermo Del Toro brought that back. He took it away from the Disney aspect, the Princess and the Frog done all beautifully, Pocahontas done all beautifully, and not show the reality of what actually occurred, the horrors that actually were played out.
Yeah, do you know what I realized too? I'm just remembering that her name was Princess Moana.
Yeah, right?
I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Not the same Moana, of course.
Yeah.
But
which there is so they throw a bunch of legends into this story.
Yes.
Obviously, you have the legends of the Labyrinth and the Minotaur inside, which Pan is considered half Minotaur because of the hooves at the bottom. So yes, he's a faun, but that's technically what it is. It's a horse, which is the same thing of what a Minotaur is. So he's the guardian of this labyrinth. And what does the labyrinth actually lead to?
Right.
What does it lead to? Is it the imagination of Ophelia, or is it the reality of what her world really is?
Yeah.
Which I think that's interesting, the way that this kind of develops and devolves quickly into, like, is she going to survive this?
Right. Well, and then you also have the dichotomy of all of these secret rebels, potentially communists, I guess, if you're going to go that route. They're hiding in the woods on the edge, and you have like Mercedes, who's the housekeeper, who basically tells her not to go into the labyrinth because it's dangerous.
Yeah.
But what does Mercedes know about that, right?
I wonder, because she lives there her whole life, so I'm pretty sure there's legends behind it already.
Right.
But who's your favorite character in this movie?
Oh golly. I loved the monsters, like the one with the eyes in the hand.
Oh, yes.
I thought he was just incredible. But I enjoyed Pan himself, because I think he was a symbol of so many different things. Right? The decision to what are you going to do? What direction are you going to go? He almost takes the role of the goddess like Hecate, right? Who's like at the crossroads.
Yep.
You have these three things you need to do. So it ties into a little bit of paganism as well.
Oh, there's a lot of pagan symbols scattered throughout.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And so to me, he was the key to so much in this film. He and when she thinks that she's failed, he is like, yeah, you got to own that. You didn't do what I wanted you to do.
Yep. I love that too.
She's devastated. Yeah.
It has that real life aspect, and again, it goes back to that. Like, is this reality? Is this fantasy? Which one bleeds into what? And
Right.
I think my favorite character by far is the fairies.
Sure.
I love how they do the transformation, and it blew my mind when I first saw this. I was like, oh my god, we're just talking about this. How like I would never look at a dragonfly the same. Yes, 100%.
Right. 100%.
It's like every time I look at an insect with wings, I'm like, ooh, I wonder if that is, and I wonder if that's where the legend came from. It's just these random bugs that are these weird insects that fly around and have these wing type things and their body like shaped like a human.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they also try to warn her against the Pale Man, which is the one with the eyeballs and the sides palms. But also, like, does he represent gluttony? Does he represent some of those other non-pagan sins, right?
I think it's 100% gluttony. I think that's what that represents. And then I don't know what the frog would represent.
Maybe sloth. I'm not really sure.
Maybe, yeah.
But,
yeah, because she did have to exert herself extra to get down there and kind of either that or pride.
Maybe pride, yeah.
Because she gets rid of all her clothes. She literally like, allows herself to be bare in the dirt and mud, and ruins everything of that evening for her mom. So.
Yeah, and I think because her mother passes, doesn't she?
Yes, she does.
Yeah,
and that's where it takes a really dark turn in the last half an hour.
Really dark, yeah, really dark. Because then she's like locked away. She's a prisoner.
Yeah,
she's at the mercy of her evil stepfather. And her only ally is that Mercedes.
And even she gets at one point like questioned by the general, and then gets turned around into hunted down and everything. So even that character doesn't survive this onslaught of this man. But I think it's fascinating the way that this film still to this day resonates with audiences, and it's become such a cult hit because we see these things that are like, people don't want to tackle the dark fantasy. They don't want to tackle this kind of legends and stuff like that, and real legends. They want this glossy, beautifully shined Disney product that gives you a happy ending. Mm-hmm. But that's not real life.
Yeah. No, but it's amazing that this little girl gathers enough strength to drug this evil person, get her brother, and manage to get to there. And he's following her, all like stumbling, like, oh, Ophelia, and she runs the labyrinth, with her brother, and she reaches in. The fawn's just like, yes, and he's waiting for her with that dagger from the Pale Man's lair.
Yeah.
The fawn's like, well, the full moon's here. What you gonna do? And then she does her own blood, of course, and she gets bleed out, So does she die, from bleeding out? Does she actually go to this other place? Is this all just in her head? And we don't know, because the last scene just shows an entirely different place, so we don't really know. And it ends with that line, it ends with that joyful reunification.
Yep.
A beloved ruler, she is unlike the commander, she's this loving ruler, right? So,
and it makes you wonder if that's her fantasy, her death fantasy right before she passes.
Yeah.
And I think it's a great idea, like, look, a lot of us suffer through that. A lot of us suffer through these dark times where we don't know what to do, we don't know how to tackle real life, so we go into fantasy, but the fantasy is not any better sometimes, and our dreams are dark and scary too. And what do we do when that's the case? We have to fight, and we have to push ourselves past that darkness and into the light, into the goal that we want to achieve, which is the princess. That's the goal that she sets on upon herself to heal herself.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And we don't really know what happens to her little brother, right? Because
Yeah.
Vidal runs out of there with the baby, and of course, then he gets shot. It's just this violent ending that kind of sort of self-resolves. And I guess I wanted more than just you're in this little night now. And
I like that though. I like the fact that it left it open like that because it's very true to the Brothers Grimm style, which
yes, that's true.
it wraps up in this dark, twisted way that it leaves it open for your interpretation. Thus, why there's so many different interpretations of these fairy tales done throughout the years, because they left it open for people to interpret it whichever way they wanted.
That's true. And I think that what made this especially gritty was that because he uses, at least in this movie's case, primarily unknown actors,
Yep.
you are able to be propelled into the story. You are absorbed by the story. You are consumed by this story because you're like, oh my gosh, you're like on the edge of your seat the whole time. That Pale Man scene.
Oh, that thing's a white knuckler.
Quiet. Oh, such a white knuckler because you're like, oh my god, don't wake him up. Oh, don't make a noise. And then, of course, and he's like, he stretches and he just puts those eyeballs in his hands. You're like, ah! But he was so cool. But besides that, it's like you have these fairies, and these fairies are also like little tattletales. They're telling LaFawn that she was bad, she disobeyed, and she doesn't get away with it. She has to own it, right? And this whole movie is kind of about owning it a little bit too. Saying you have to be brave, and you have to be somewhat selfless, and you have to get over yourself. Because she did. Ophelia had moments where she was like, oh, what, like the, oh, pity me type stuff. But then she gathered enough courage to move away from that and say, you know what? I'm going to go check this out. I'm Princess Moana. And she was believing her own.
And I think that's what all these stories are. It's a morality tale of like coming into your own and realizing that you are as strong as you think you are.
Right. And I mean, what I meant by it just kind of was not so much, I wanted to see a little bit more, not for closure's sake, but I was really curious about the world. I'm like, just show me a little bit more. I can see what's there.
Well, there's
similar to the rest of his too, though. He does that with all his movies.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing, that this is a fairy tale. A fairy tale is minor in scope, and it concentrates into a small little scope of a world that this author or director or writer creates. Then you have these epic stories like Lord of the Rings and high fantasy stories that kind of encompass other things. And then you have, the tales, which the folk tales, which are more world building and stuff like that. And then obviously like Lord of the Rings is high fantasy, which is a combination of all three types of fantasy. So the way that these kind of fairy tales are very localized, very focused into one subject. And I like that they just focuses on one tale. And it goes from the beginning of the tale where they meet up with the dragonflies for the first time, quote unquote fairies. Yeah. And then it ends with the wrap up of the story. It's very much like the Brothers Grimm stories.
Yeah.
Which just...
Yes, it is.
It ends in a way that you could learn from your mistakes that you make in the movie or in the journey. And I think that's what fairy tales were always intended to be. They're intended to be ways to learn from mistakes that you haven't gone through yet, but others have.
Yeah, I think probably one of the most intense parts. Well, there's so many intense parts of this film, but
Yeah.
we see an adult shoot a child.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
You know, Vidal shoots Ophelia, who that's how her blood ends up getting in the portal. But he shoots her. You know, and that's hard to watch, right? I
Yeah.
mean, most people are like, "Ooh, I don't want to see that," right? But she smiles. She smiles as her blood drips into that portal.
Yep.
And she's like, I won. You know,
I
I still beat you.
I
You
think
know,
it's important too. I think
yeah.
a lot of these, and it goes back again to what I was saying, that this is a very hard story to tell appropriately
Yes.
and give away the same moral lesson that is taught by these tales. Because if you fluff it up and make it into these beautifully done and wonderful movies that Disney does, and it kind of just shines over all the bad parts, then you create a generation of entitlement, and that's not what it's about. Fairy tales were always intended as life lessons and lessons for you to learn, so you don't stumble the same way that the previous generations did.
Yeah. No, for sure. For
And
sure.
I love that they did this like this, and this is something that should be watched by children. I mean, I remember watching.
And older children. I wouldn't say
I
younger
mean,
children.
I remember watching Legend, the Ridley Scott Legend and Labyrinth and Neverending Story, and those weren't fluffy movies. And I was watching that when I was 3 or 4, and
That's
let me
true.
tell you, they're they're amazing to watch. And
Yeah.
even classic animation movies from the 90s, like All Dogs Go to Heaven and stuff like that, those are very dark movies,
They are.
but they have a moral lesson to them that's important. And I think that's what the stem, the core of this film 100% revolves around that. And it revolves around life lessons that is taught to this poor child that's suffering so much in this period of time.
Oh, so I just saw some interesting trivia about this too. So apparently, the English subtitles were translated and written by Del Toro himself
Yes.
because he no longer trusts translators,
Oh,
which
yeah,
is fabulous.
yeah.
Oh, that's
Because
fun.
it's the truth. Like, I watch some Spanish movies and stuff like that, and I do speak Spanish, and it's interesting to see the translations completely off, and I'm like, what? No, that's not the same thing. That is nowhere near the same context that they're talking about, and you lose stuff. So I turn off subtitles sometimes when I'm listening to Spanish movies because I'm like, no. Or I put the subtitles in Spanish so I know what they're talking.
Yeah, and then I had read somewhere else too that the role of Ophelia was originally written for an 8 or 9 year old, but I
Hmm.
guess Del Toro was so impressed with Ivana Baquero, the 11-year-old, that he revised it.
Oh, dude, she did an amazing job in this movie,
Yeah.
though.
Oh, yeah. Wonder what else she's been doing. She's got to be, but in her 20s now, right? Let's see.
Probably, yeah. I would say so.
Wow. Yeah, she's 24. She's from Barcelona.
Huh.
Oh, hi. She looks very grown up now. Okay. I was just looking her up. But no, like I think for me, you know, the whole concept of this was so beautiful. I felt that even though it was a violent film, you have the violence against women, of course. You have just violence throughout the entire movie. But I still think that it was done in such a way that you are kind of seduced by the beauty of the film. His cinematography, of course, is top notch.
It's
And
shot in such a beautiful way where it's dark, but
oh
you
yeah,
see everything that's going on. It's
mhm,
not dark like these movies that are done now you can't see shit that's going on in the
right.
movie. It's shot so you could see every single aspect. In the labyrinth itself, you could see all the details that go into the wall, yet it is very dark scenes.
Yeah. Have you read that like some people call this kind of like Alice in Wonderland for grown-ups? I mean, I don't really think so. You know,
I
it's
could
not like
see
you
that
have
going down the rabbit hole and all that stuff, but it has a completely different feel to it.
yeah, that's what I felt too. That it's not like that at all.
but I mean, the main influence for Alice in Wonderland was fairy tales. So I could see where that comes from, and it stems from actually MacDonald. William MacDonald was what do you call it? The mentor of what do you call it? Oh my god, I blanked out on his name. The writer of Alice in Wonderland. Oh my god, I just completely.
Oh, Lewis Carroll.
Yes, Lewis Carroll. He was the mentor of Lewis Carroll, and they helped each other. But MacDonald was a religious fantasy writer. He's the one that started fantasy actually, as a mainstream medium, and this was one of the first things that he said to Carroll was actually saying, "Look, when you write these, you write a moral tale." You're writing like the story of Beowulf was to our ancestors. You have to write this as a purpose. Canterbury Tales, all these stories were the basis for fairy tales and high fantasy back in the mid 1800s, and that's MacDonald was the core of all that. I mean, literally, it was 100 years before Tolkien and C.S. Lewis and all these huge high fantasy authors came to be, and they all use MacDonald as a basis, but their stories are all dark, very dark.
They are. So how much do you think that The Shape of Water was influenced by Pan's Labyrinth?
Oh, a lot. The colors 100% are similar to that. I mean, all of Guillermo Del Toro's movies are all very much same color palette, and they all have the same aspects, the very gothic, dark fantasy to it.
Well, she was a princess too.
Yes, she was. Yes, she was. Which, oh man, I what do you like about Guillermo del Toro so much that makes you put him up there with the likes of Stanley Kubrick as well?
Oh, gosh. The use of music, the use of his cinematography, the way that he encapsulates a scene, the way you just dive into these stories and you come away so affected.
The music. The music in this film. Oh my god. It's incredible. It has this kind of like Secret Garden-esque music to it. It's so beautifully done, and it's so subtle. It's so subtle. It's in the background, in the deep background, the recesses of this film, but it makes you feel and emphasizes the feelings of the film, which is pretty interesting.
Yes. And what's really interesting is if you look at the still shots of like the fawn holding the little girl's head, she looks just like the adult actresses in The Shape of Water. Just saying. But they look very, very similar. Yeah. There's it's a really good like side shot of the fawn just kind of holding the little girl, and it's always this dichotomy of the human with the monster. Does the monster represent our own personal demons? Does the monster represent the darker parts of who we are? Right.
I mean, I also think that this could also be a representation of loss of innocence, in the sense of what do you call it, going into adulthood, and obviously she's of age to go into adulthood. I remember watching this for the first time, and I was like, oh, she's gonna have her period now, when she saw the book that bleeds and stuff like that, and I was like, when I saw that it was her mother, I was like, oh wow, okay, we're going that way. But honestly, I thought this was gonna be like a coming of age story, kind of like this is a representation of the innocent loss of innocence of a child into adulthood by obviously starting the period and all that, the cycle and all that stuff.
Well, and I think that Del Toro, I think he also, I want to say he intended Pan's Labyrinth to also be kind of like a thematic complement to The Devil's Backbone. Yeah, they have a lot of similarities in like their structure and setup. And I think that like unfortunately like 9/11 like happened within like 5 months of The Devil's Backbone, so it's kind of an odd occurrence, And then the movie also has a lot of Dickinsonian stuff in it as well.
Yeah, it does. But Guillermo Del Toro is another director that could actually instruct kid actors in a fascinating way. Spielberg has this talent with kid actors, and Guillermo del Toro
Sure.
is right behind him. They have such a weird way that they could actually teach children how to act in a way that is realistic, and it doesn't take you away from the film in any way or form that there's a child actor in there. And I think that's
Uh,
fascinating because a lot of directors they direct what do you call it, kids, but you always think that it's an actor. It doesn't ever like give you that feeling of, oh, I'm not watching an actor, I'm watching a movie. And this is amazing. This is, you just completely envelop in the story. And I remember the only other director that could really, really do that is Spielberg because he's
right.
just so good at it.
He is. He's very good at it. You had said, like, what do I like so much? And Del Toro incorporates into his props, into the settings, all of the worlds. Like, for instance, I remember the banister, right? There's a curvature at the end of the banister. Well, it's the shape of the fawn's head,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
it's the, the fantasy world and the real one bleed. That there's like a very thin line between the two worlds. And he's so successful in that because you don't know which for her is real, which for her is not. You do because her horrible stepfather is there, and you see those types of things, right? But
Which,
when
even
she's
in that
really,
sense, it's interesting to see movies and books that are written in the perspective of a child because children see things so differently and they remember things so differently than it really is. And you could tell that the stepfather character is swelled up that much more villainesque in this film because of her imagination. And like that one scene, the first scene that she interacts with him, he's grabbing onto her hand
yeah,
in such a brute force way, and it makes you wonder, did that actually happen or was that her imagination starting already?
true. And actually, I just found a quote about whether there's a correct answer to whether there's a question of whether it's real or not, or all in Ophelia's head. And it says here, like Del Toro has reiterated many times that while a story can mean different things to different people, quote, objectively, the way I structured it, there are clues that tell you that it's real. Specifically, the flower blooming on the dead tree at the end, the chalk ending up on Vidal's desk as there's no way it could have gotten there, and Ophelia's escape through a dead end of
Yeah.
the labyrinth. Ooh, so.
Huh. That's
Which I find
interesting.
interesting.
Yeah.
That's from Guillermo himself, and so that's very interesting.
Which I think that takes away from some of the fun of the movie, though.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
I
That would
like
be
I
cool.
like having a full conversation like this about
Yeah,
the different interpretations that you could have of the film because everybody
sure.
could be so different, and I think that's I love that about movies. That's one of the things that I love Stanley Kubrick movies about because they're like that. They leave it open for interpretation so much.
Mm-hmm.
And Guillermo del Toro does the same thing in most of his films. Devil's Backbone is pretty open ended at the very end, and it leaves it
Yeah,
open for a lot of interpretation in that movie.
yeah. I love that. Yeah. So it's like, on the one hand, it's kind of fun to discover those things from a director's point of view, but it's like,
Yeah,
you know what? Leave your director's POV over there.
yeah,
I, I want to interpret this on my own. I want to figure out, this, how do you say it? Laberinto de Fauno? How's that
the
you say
Fauno. Yeah,
it?
the
De Fauno.
Fauno.
Yeah, de Fauno. But yeah, so I mean, it's just, it's just, to me, that's like, ah, yes, and we get mad at the fawn, but we love the fawn. You know,
it's
we
it's
get
our
mad at her
conscious.
and we love her too. Yeah,
It's our conscious because I mean, how many times do we struggle a day with thoughts that go through our head that we don't agree with, and for very very much example, I'm a completely different person than I was 15 years ago, 10 years ago,
Sure.
5 years ago even, and I look back on a lot of those times and I see myself and I'm like, damn, that's really messed up. I did a lot of really messed up things. And I don't regret them because I learned from them. But you see the different perspective. And I remember talking with my parents about certain situations, and I remember it completely different than they did.
Sure.
And that makes you wonder how how much of a actual narration is this? Is this what do you call it, a um unreliable narrator that's actually giving the story? And you wonder if there is exaggeration, because is this the story of Pan or is this the story of Ophelia?
Ophelia.
You think
All the
so?
way.
Because Pan
Yeah,
narrates the whole film.
he does.
So is this the story that Pan is telling, or is this the story that Ophelia, or that Pan is telling Ophelia, or recalling this in a court type of thing, in her court, her royal court at the end of the film? That's what it makes you wonder. It's like, is this
Sure.
can you really count on the narration of this film? Which is interesting in itself too. It's like, ooh,
Well, but if you think about who the fawn is, and if he really is Han, no, you can't.
exactly. So that makes you
Ah,
wonder so many different things. It's like,
yeah.
was this really the case? Was this really the situation that occurred? Or was something else that actually happened, And
I mean, he's as a director. I mean, if you think about all of his other films, right? He did the Hellboy franchise, Blade, Mimic, Pacific Rim,
yes.
Chronos, Crimson Peak. You know, I don't think he's got a light film in the bunch.
No, never.
He is working through. Maybe the Vaughn represents Del Toro.
Oh, I wouldn't doubt it.
You
I
know,
mean, how often
and
do we wonder these things, and how often I remember when I was a kid that I was very much like the fawn. I was very much a trickster. I was a manipulator. I was somebody that could manipulate situations to my liking and to my advantage, and had no sympathy for it whatsoever.
mm, interesting.
So it makes you wonder about that, because you evolve from that character. But also, if you think about it, children are like that too. Children
Oh
are manipulative. How many times do you hear a child crying, and then as soon as you give them what they want, they shut up immediately? So
yeah,
technically,
right.
they're trying to do is manipulate you, because they know crying equals toy. So it's the same thing that the fawn does,
Yeah.
which is
What's really interesting too is if you look at the picture of the fawn, he has, instead of eyebrows, these swirls. Looks like labyrinths on his own forehead. Did you ever notice that?
I didn't know, but there's a bunch of like subtle things in every single one of the creatures. It's very
Yeah.
interesting how they did that. Like even the creature with the eyeballs, the gluttony creature,
Yeah.
it has this kind of old man wrinkly skin thing to it. So it makes
Yeah.
you wonder if this is the Father Time or something like that, like an
Yeah.
interpretation of Father Time.
Well, he's also terribly gaunt.
Yeah,
He's got this skin that's just falling off of him.
yeah. So it makes you wonder about that. But that's what I love about this film, and that's what I love about having one of these conversations like this. That you can open up so many different doors and so many different interpretations of these films.
Yes.
Uh,
Yes.
but Molly, overall, what closing remarks do you want to give about this film?
Oh,
Why do you love it and everything?
gosh. I can't believe our time's already up. Because I have so much on this film. I think just the absolute beauty and story. It's a feast for the eyes. It's a feast for the mind. If you haven't watched it, shame on you people out there. Watch this film. It's so amazing. It's probably a timeless piece, even though it takes place at a certain point in time. It's a story, I believe, that fortunately and unfortunately, so many of us go through is the darkness that lives inside of us besides the light that lives inside of us. And that juxtaposition between the two and the balance between the light and the dark. And what we make of it, how we are in charge of our own destinies. And I think that's probably one of the biggest messages that comes out of this, is that you are in charge of your own destiny. So
I agree 100%. That was beautifully said. Thank you so much for giving that insight, because that is 100% what this message of this film is, at least from both of our interpretations. At least it's
yes.
You are yourself. Be yourself. Yeah. Be who you are, because you're beautiful and you're amazing, and just do what you want to do in life, because guess what? You only have one life, and you got to live it to the fullest, and every moment counts. Even if you're going through the darkest times, know that there's always something that could help, that could pull you out of that darkness, whether it be a friend, whether it be some type of goal that you set yourself, like this character does in this film. And at the end, she does see the light. She does get to where she wants to get to, even though she's gone through hell and back, literally and figuratively. And there's so much to look forward to in life. So whenever you're feeling dark and gloomy, and a lot of people take this film as very dark and gloomy and kind of takes you to the cusp of suicide type of thing, suicide awareness. And I don't think it does. I think it brings you out of the darkness.
Yes.
I think some of these dark fantasy films, they're meant to give you hope, even though they give you dark times and dark situations that you have to pull out of. But know that these are struggles that everybody's going through in life, and everybody has a way of coming out of them, like she does. Even a child could pull herself out of this situation herself. Nobody helping her. She did it herself, and the Fawn made sure of that. And I think that's super important. And thank you so much, Mollee, for joining us. Where can anybody check out any of your content?
Sure. So right now, just kind of working on a little bit of the Insta, but right here at Man Bites Media and at Diversity Discussing.
Yes. So if you do want to check out any of Mollee's stuff, you could go to diverselygeek.org or manbitesfilm.org and .com, and you're able to check out all our content on both of our different sites, because we work in conjunction with Diversely Geek a lot. And our crews cross over a lot. But definitely check this movie out. It's actually currently streaming on Netflix, so it's easy access for everybody to check out. And I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. If you have, please subscribe. Let us know what you think of this. Actually give us a proper rating. Let us know what you actually want us to do in the future. Recommendations. You could leave a comment, leave a review of what we did, right, wrong, whichever way you feel. Give us your actual honest opinion, and join us on Facebook for our conversations, because we love having conversations about these films and these tough subjects. I just posted the most recent review, our week review, that is Sabrina, The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina Part 2. And that was definitely an interesting article to bring up, and a lot of people commented on it, and that's what I'm looking for, a community of people to have a conversation with. That's what we started this for. So we'll see you guys next week for another episode. And again, thank you so much, Mollee, for joining us this week.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, Luis.
Have a good night.